I don't care who you are, that is funny. All right, we continue to look at stress, and last week what we did is we actually retitled the series and retitled last week's message. We're not too blessed to be stressed. We're too blessed to stay stressed. Today's message is entitled Stress Busters. Any of you ever see the movie Ghostbusters? Kaboom! Getting rid of stress. How do you do it? We're going to explore that this morning in the message. We got a couple of passages we're going to look at in the scripture. The first comes from the book of Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 12, verses 25 and 26. Worry weighs a person down. An encouraging word cheers a person up. The godly, the people you hang around with that love the Lord, they give good advice to their friends. The wicked, they lead people astray. And then this well-known passage from the Gospel of Luke, Jesus talking to the multitude. Turning to his disciples, Jesus said, I tell you, don't worry about everyday life, whether you have enough food or to eat or clothes to wear, for life consists of far more than food and clothing. Look at the ravens. They don't need to plant or harvest or put food in barns because God feeds them. And you are far more valuable to him than any birds. Can all your worries add a single moment to your life? Of course not. And if worry can't do a little thing like that, what's the use of worrying over the bigger things? Look at the lilies and how they grow. They don't work or make their clothing, yet Solomon in all of his glory was not dressed as beautifully as they are. And if God cares so wonderfully for the flowers that are here today and gone tomorrow, won't he more surely care for you? You have so little faith. And don't worry about food, what to eat and drink. Don't worry whether God will provide it for you. These things dominate the thoughts of most people, but your Father already knows your needs. He will give you all you need from day to day, and if you make the kingdom of God your primary concern. So don't be afraid, little flock, for it gives your Father great happiness to give you the kingdom. I read these two passages to you to make one point and one point only. Worry is the easiest way to increase your stress level. If you want to worry, you'll be stressed. If you want to have faith, you'll get rid of your stress. Let me give you 4 realities as we go into this message that I think you'll find helpful. Number 1, stress is normal. And it is not the stress in our life that causes the problem. It's what we do with the stress that causes the problem. Everybody is stressed. The people who seem to have peace in their lives and be effective in their lives are not people who have less stress than you have. They're people who handle the stress they have differently than you handle it. Number 2, God knows you'll be stressed, and he's never surprised, shocked, or puzzled about what to do. Here's an interesting thing. God is not sitting in heaven and something happens in your life that increases your stress level, and he's saying, never saw that coming. Wonder what I should do about that. No, God is outside of time. He lives in a place called eternity. He sees the beginning from the end. He's the one that says when you're going through it right here, that all things are going to work together for good. He's the one that says that you are more than a conqueror. He's the one that at the end of the book has already told you what the outcome is. You win. God knows that you are going to be stressed, and consequently, God knows how to help you through the stress. He's not puzzled by it, not surprised by it. Number 3, God knows all things work together for good and wants you to know that as well. How many of you worry? Come on, Okay. Listen carefully. How many of you know that this verse says all things work together for good if you love God? Now, how can you believe that and worry at the same time? Come on, let's be real about this. The problem is, listen, facts, until they reach the heart, don't produce faith. Let me say that again. Facts, until they reach your heart, don't turn into faith. You see, we have worry, and yet we know the scriptures say this. But yet, if we deeply believe that scripture, it gets from our head to our heart, we say, Lord, I don't know what in the world I'm going through, but Lord, I'm going through. I don't know what caused this, and I don't need to know what caused it, Lord, but I know I'm in your hands and all things will work together for good. It doesn't alleviate the stressor, but it gives you a perspective on the stressor that takes away the worry. Does that make sense to you all? Yes. Okay. Number 4. God knows what he intended for good, the devil will use for evil. I want you to know that stress is a gift from God. Stress is something God gives us. In fact, it's even something God uses. But God gives us stress as a gift. But let me just give you an example. The devil will take whatever stress comes into your life and he'll try and exploit it. Anybody ever had stress in their family? Okay, watch this. Watch this. God says, put your faith and trust in me, and we'll get through this thing. And the devil comes along and says, you got a stress with your spouse, let's get divorced and get rid of the problem. And how many of you know it doesn't get rid of the problem? Because what happens is the devil always wants to take what he sees you do and what he hears you say and exploit it to make your life worse, not better. All right, let's go on. And here are 6 ways I'll guarantee you, if you do nothing else after this service is over, but do these things, you'll be as stressed next week as you are right now. Number 1, worry. Worry. Worry is the number 1. The Bible talks plenty about it. Worry is, by both the Bible and all the scientists, is the number 1 way to increase your stress level. It's not a matter of if stuff is going to happen in your life, it is. Worry about stuff is what will literally kill you. Number 2 is fear. Fear. The cortisol hormone, which rises whenever your equilibrium is destroyed, produces fear, a healthy fear that moves you to action. But you can't go through life afraid. If you go through life afraid, you will keep your stress. Number 3, an unhealthy contentment. All of us love our equilibrium. We like to be comfortable right now. But that's a prescription for not growing. We all love our comfort more than we love change. How many of you know that's true? We love comfort more than we love change. And so in our lives, listen, we develop a resistance to change. And sometimes that resistance to change is resistance to God trying to change us. Number 4, poor self-worth and self-talk. If you say, I don't know how I'm ever going to get out of this. I'm not even sure God can help me with this. I've never had anything like this happen before. I don't know what I'm going to do. You start talking yourself into more stress is what you do. Watch what you say. If you get into a situation and you say, Lord, I thank you that there's something you want to do through this situation. And I thank you the promise is that nothing that happens in my life will destroy me, because greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world. I thank you, Lord, that I'm the head and not the tail. I'm above and I'm not beneath. I thank you that your promise to be with me is uncontingent about what I'm going through. You'll go through me with all my whatevers. You start speaking faith, you will develop faith. You start speaking doubt, you will create doubt. Watch your self-talk. It's a guaranteed way to increase stress. Lack of gratitude. Lack of gratitude. I almost, and I've got the notes at home, I was about 3/4 of the way convinced about what I was going to speak on this week, and guess what? It was a Thanksgiving message. Why? Because gratitude is the number one way you as a Christian can start to reduce your stress. You go and start praising God with your lips. You start lifting your voice in praise and adoration to Him. And you start going from just knowing that God is to be praised to praising God with your lips. You'll find out that you'll come to believe that God is bigger, God is greater, God is stronger than anything and everything you face. And then number 6, accommodation and toleration. One of the reasons people stay stressed is they become comfortable with stress. They become comfortable with their dysfunction. Have you ever seen people, their lives are not really put together, but they're saying this: that's just the way I am? And you go, thank God I'm not that way. Because we can get comfortable, all of us can get comfortable with stuff that's not helpful in our lives. Now, there are 4 kinds of stress that you can get in your life. I'm just unpacking a lot of this stuff, and it'll get good if you just hang in there with me. Number 1 is there's routine stress. It's related to all the pressures of work, family, and other daily responsibilities. Any of you guys work and you face deadlines, and you face this relationship problem, this staffing issue at home, parents, you got kids and grandkids and all of that, and all of a sudden there's things that go on. I know that when we get word that one of our grandkids is sick or something else is going on, all of a sudden we feel different. Those are just the routine stressors. They're generally pretty easy to handle. Sometimes it's just going in the hot tub for a little while and having a good night's sleep. Doesn't take that long, because all of us have normal stress in our lives. There's another kind of stress, however, and that's stress brought about by a sudden negative change, such as losing a job, divorce, illness, death of a loved one. For example, the stress at work is not nearly as strong as the stress of not having work. Here we've upped the ante. It is the kind of stress that comes when something traumatic happens. For example, you get the news that, as I did this week, I got the news that an uncle that I haven't seen for probably 25 years passed away. A man that loved God, but it hit me hard because my dad and my dad's twin and him are the 3 people in the generation that is left on my side of the family. They're all gone now. And I found myself, not because it was the grief of a person that I loved very deeply going, but just the realization there'd be no more stories coming from my past. And I felt something. And I said, how did I resolve it? I said, Lord, I thank you that I'm going to see all of these people again. I'm going to see my dad. I'm going to see my uncles. I'm going to see them all again because they all loved you. And so the parting, while it's painful, the parting is not permanent. Then there's spiritual stress. Spiritual stress is the kind of stress that God brings into your life to make you uncomfortable. How many of you know we don't change until we're uncomfortable? God brings change. I'm going to give you a passage from the Old Testament. God comes to the people of Israel and he says, like the eagle rustles his nest, so I too with you, my people. That's just the paraphrase of the concept. How does an eagle, maybe some of you have been out in the woods, any of you ever seen an eagle's nest? The best way to see an eagle's nest is from the top down, not from the bottom up. An eagle builds its nest this way. It takes all the thorns and thistles and branches and sticks, and it weaves them all together in like a basket. And the inside of that nest has got all sorts of little pokey places, things that are not very comfortable to lay on. And then the eagle goes into that nest and starts plucking out its own feathers and lines the nest with its own feathers. And it's in that environment that the little eaglet is raised. Soft, comfortable, protected. But Mama Eagle knows that this little eagle was not destined to spend its life in the nest. It was not destined to sit there with its mouth open and say, feed me, feed me, feed me. And so the mama eagle comes along, and what it does is it starts blowing out with its wings, starts blowing out all the feathers that were making life comfortable. Now all of a sudden this little eagle can't sit down without having a thorn up its. And the little eagle starts getting up onto the edge of this big nest. And then Mama just gives it a shove. As the eagle rustles the nest. God will bring things into your life because He knows, even more than you know, the potential that is inside of you that needs to be developed. And you won't change until He brings some stress into your life. Divine stress, God's gift for your growth. Let's take a look at this. I'm going to give you 4 misconceptions about stress, and I think you'll find this helpful. Number 1, we always know when we're under stress. We can become so accustomed to stress that we don't realize what it's doing to us. We suffer the effects of it and assume that the reason we can't sleep, or the reason we don't feel like eating, or the reason we're short with our friends, we blame everything except the stress. It affects the way we treat others. You know, any of you ever had this problem at home? We've had it at our house, so it's not a secret. You start raising your voice to your spouse and you're not even conscious you're raising your voice. Anybody ever? I see some of you laughing about that. What's going on? It affects the way we treat others because we're stressed and we don't even know it. And what happens is many people start drifting away from God, drifting away from church, drifting away from their friends because they start doing under stress things that are self-destructive. So that's misconception. Number 2 is stress only affects those that have high-pressure lives. We assume that stress is reserved for people who've got businesses or people who've got a lot of deadlines or people who've got a lot of pressure-packed things in their life. But the truth of the matter is, stress comes to everybody. And some of the things that cause stress that perhaps we don't think about, worry that leads to an unfulfilled life, shattered expectations. And these things often go unrecognized. For example, you were taught growing up, well, you've got great potential, and your parents paid for a great education for you, and your life really has not amounted to very much. And all of a sudden, that gap between your potential and your actual reality is called stress. And you don't know why it is your marriage is not working, or your relationships and friendships and things aren't working, and why you feel the way you feel about a lot of things you feel. And part of it is related to this whole concept of stress in your life that has not been developed with. Because as people, we develop coping mechanisms. We call those masks. Everybody around you says you're stressed, and you say, "No, I'm not." We develop the masks. Second misconception about stress: the only way to lower stress is to change your surroundings or take medication. Listen, stress comes because of the way we perceive the world. I was talking to my brother. He's in the medical business in Dallas, Texas, the Ebola center of America. He said it's amazing. He says the whole city's going nuts. The bars are full. The worry all over the city. He's in the business of disposing of medical waste. He says his business is just going through the roof. But he says it's crazy because people perceive themselves as just about ready to die. This fear that captivates them. But here's the reality. You change your outlook, you change your destiny. Changing your outlook is the easiest way to reduce your stress. Changing your outlook. If I believe when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death that the Lord is with me, His rod and staff give me comfort. If I believe when I'm going through stress is that no good thing will He withhold from those who walk uprightly before Him, all of a sudden in the stress I see it differently. And much alcohol and drug addiction starts because people are stressed and they try and drown their sorrows, and they forget that their sorrows know how to swim. Third misconception: stress is caused by events that happen to us. That, my friends, is a sophism. A sophism is something that is partially true. If you didn't have anything happen to you, you wouldn't have any stress. But we have a natural response to that stress. It comes through the hormones, cortisol and adrenaline and all that, and it gives us that fight or flight type of reaction. But Epictetus makes this statement: it's not the events themselves that cause our distress, but rather the views we take of the events. You see, we allow stress to control us instead of controlling our stress. Number 4, emotions have a will of their own and can't be controlled. Well, that's just the way I feel. No, let's rephrase that for you. That's the way you choose to feel. We are the authors of, creators of, and possessors of our own feelings. Let me use Tiago as an example. Okay? Can I do that, bro? Let's say Tiago does something that ticks me off. Makes sense. Now, I can either lash out in anger at him, I can run away and say, I don't want anything to do with that guy, or I can say, hey, we got a difference here, bro. Let's figure out how to keep our relationship solid. You see, I can make the choice, and there are always lots of choices in things. And be careful of what your default response is. For example, some people, their default response every time something stressful comes in their life is to withdraw. Some people, their default thing is anger. Be careful about what your default response is. Recognize you have the power to choose how you feel. Something can be going on that is very, very, very stressful in your life. And you can choose to believe that God is going to give you the victory in this situation. And you can choose to live not based on the stress of the situation, but you can choose to go through this situation because of your trust in the goodness and graciousness of God. Because here's the principle. Until you and I take responsibility for the role we play in creating our stress level remains out of our control. Because I am absolutely sure that most of us do an awful lot of stuff to keep our stress. Now here's my simple, if you want the sermon in a nutshell, we can look at this and you can go home. Print this graphic on durable paper. Stick the paper to a hard, solid surface, horizontal or vertical will do, depending upon the situation. Follow the instructions until you die, become unconscious, or decide there's a better way. You take it and you bang your head against it. When you pass out or die, it's over. When you wake up, if you still got the stress, do it again. Let me ask you the question. How many of you feel like you're just batting your head up against the wall? Over and over and over and over again. Well, why not just get rid of the stuff or deal with the stuff that's causing you to want to bang your head against the wall? You know, stupidity is defined as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Be careful about defaults. Let's take a look at stress, and we're going to start I'm going to give you a quick list. This is not material that I have developed. I looked up this week, I just did some research, and I said, what are unhealthy ways of coping with stress? Just type it into the search engine. Here's what you find out. There's about 8 or 9 things that everyone agrees on increases your stress. Smoking does. Drinking too much, particularly caffeine, drinks with a lot of caffeine and a lot of sugar. Overeating or undereating, that normally is a change in what your normal eating pattern is. Zoning out for hours in front of a TV. Withdrawing from friends, family, and other activities. Using pills or drugs to relax or sleep. Sleeping too much. Procrastinating. Filling up every minute of the day with stuff to avoid facing the problems. How many of you find yourself trying to get too busy? You're so busy you can't take care of the real issues. Okay. And how about taking your stress out on others? Everybody knows you're stressed except you. Let's take a look at some ways of dealing with stressful situation. I'm going to give you the 4 A's. The first 2 are under the category of change the situation. Number 1, learn how to avoid the things that stress you. And number 2, learn how to alter the things that stress you. Then we've got to change our response go to the next slide, please. We've got to change the way we react to the stressors. How? By adapting to them or accepting to them. Remember last week we finished with that serenity prayer. Lord, give me the courage to change the things I can change and the ability to recognize the things I can't change and the wisdom to know the difference. Yeah, so we want to talk about how do you accept stressors and by accepting them reduce the stress. So let's take a look at these 4 and we're going to look at avoiding unnecessary stress. Number 1, learn how to say no. Know your limits and stick to them. Here's what happens. How many of you have noticed at work or anything else, when your schedule gets too full, stress goes up? Okay? What you need to do is start recognizing what your capacity is. What's your capacity emotionally? What's your capacity relationally? What's your capacity? And not exceed it. If you take a cup and you fill that cup with water, when the cup gets full and you continue to try and put water into it, the overflow of that causes the problem. It's not the stuff that's in the cup that causes the problem. It's the stuff that should be in the cup that causes the problem. And what ends up happening is the table gets wet or something gets wet. There's an overflow of that. And taking on more than you can handle is a surefire recipe for stress. So learn how to say no. Second thing, avoid people who stress you out. If someone consistently causes stress in your life and you can't turn the relationship around, limit the amount of time or end the relationship. Now, I'm going to give you an illustration. There's nobody in this church like this. So this illustration is actually from a church I pastored in Santa Ana. I'm not going to use a lady's name, but every Sunday morning about between 20 and 8:45, I would be coming out of my office, and as soon as I walked out of my office, she was there. And she said, "Pastor, if you've just got a minute, I got something I need to talk to you about." And guaranteed, before I went into the service, the last thing that went into my mind was not the prayer I had in my office that God would bless the service. The prayer I had in my office, the last thing I had in my mind before I went in, is this negative stuff she kept bringing up every single week. And I couldn't figure out why I was losing the joy in my preaching. So finally it clicked. And one Sunday she's there, and I just got out of my office, and I said to her, "I'm sorry, I love you, and I like talking to you, but I will not do it any longer before service, because every time you talk, you take the joy of the Lord out of my heart." Done. I basically had to say, I can't do this anymore and keep my sanity. I need to be around people who will build me up, who will edify me, not people who are constantly tearing me down. Now, did she get upset about that? Oh yeah, she got upset about that. But guess what? I could have let her being upset stress me. But I ended up saying to her, "You know, if you're not happy here, maybe you ought to try and find a church closer to your home where you could be happy." Because she wasn't happy as a person, and she was taking her unhappiness out on everyone else. Avoid the people who stress you. There are some people that you hang around with that you ought not to be hanging around with. They don't build you up. They're constantly tearing you down, and they're adding to the stress in your life, not relieving the stress. Number 3, take control of your environment. If what's going on in the world makes you anxious, don't read about it and don't watch it on TV. If the traffic's got you tense, take the bus. If going to the market's an unpleasant chore, shop online. Take control of your environment. You control the environment you live in. And we make different choices, so take control of it. Number 3, in avoiding unnecessary stress, avoid hot button topics. How many of you have got family members, and when those family members get around you, you know stress is coming? Okay? Pay attention to this. Next time you're around them, watch what it is they bring up that gets the hot buttons going. So it might be politics. It might be whatever. And just simply say, "I love the relationships that I have in our family so much that I don't want to talk about that." Because every time we do, we just end up arguing, and it really is not helpful to what we're doing at Christmas or what we're doing at Thanksgiving. You know, if you get upset about an issue, don't deal with that issue. If every time, if you've got such strong political views that you find yourself in a lot of arguments with people over it, quit talking about it. It'll strengthen your relationships. Because if you repeatedly argue about the same subject with the same people, stop bringing it up. Avoid the hot button topics. Number 4, pare down your to-do list. Look at your schedule. All of us need to manage our time better. Agreed? But if I know what I must do, what I should do, what I could do, and start to make this kind of decision, what will be the best use of my time today? Do you know what happens? Stress goes way down. Because I will drop the tasks that aren't truly necessary or eliminate them. If I ask the question, will this matter 6 months from now? If the answer is no, it probably doesn't matter now. Okay? Avoid unnecessary tasks. Pare down. Now, we avoid and we alter. Express your feelings rather than bottling them up. If someone is around me and they're constantly making me feel tense, what I will have a tendency to do is just simply avoid them. Now that's my natural default, but that never restores a relationship. I know that. I need to communicate and say, here's what I'm feeling. Here's what I'm feeling. Can we talk about this? I want to have a good relationship with you, but as long as there's this barrier, I can't have it. If you don't voice your feelings, listen, if you don't voice your feelings, resentment builds up. And the situation either remains the same or get worse. Because if you don't deal with your feelings will control you. And there's nothing worse for Christian community than people who are feelings driven. If everybody here just did what they feel like, would it create more chaos or less? More. Okay. So in your family, in your husband and wife relationships or with your kids, if you just get an environment where everybody does what they feel like, is your family going to be better or worse? Worse. Yeah. Either deal with the feelings or let them control you. Your choice. Alter. Be willing to compromise. It's not always stress-reducing to get your own way. Let's say Margaret and I have got an issue we're dealing with. It may not reduce stress in our relationship if I get my way or if she gets her way. It's not always stress-reducing to get your own way. Here's the interesting thing. If you believe that the other person needs to change, that's probably a pretty good indicator you need to change too. Okay, does that make sense to you? Don't get yourself in a situation where you're constantly blaming the other person, that they're the people that have to make the change, and you don't make the changes yourself. Alter. Be more assertive. Don't take the back seat in your own life. And what do I mean by that? Deal with what you have to deal with. Do your best with that. Be more assertive. Recognize is that the battle goes to the strong. Okay, that's what the scripture says. The battle will go to the strong. If you're assertive, if you're strong, what you'll do is you'll find out that you have the ability to deal with what comes into your life. Altered. Number 3. Manage your time better. Poor time management increases stress. And so when you have your calendar, when you look at your life, if you are overfilled in your calendar and you do that intentionally, it's probably an indicator you've got stressors in your life you don't want to deal with. Okay? Build time into your calendar to play. Build time into your calendar to meditate. Build time into your calendar to relax. Chill out. Chill out. Alter the situation. Next. Adapt to the stressors. Reframe your problems. If stress is a gift from God, which I believe it is, if I take the stressful situations I'm facing and I look at them from God's perspective, how does God see it? It'll change my perspective on the problem. Because I know that nothing God does in my life is for evil. I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. Plans to give you a future and a hope. Not plans for evil. God's plans for you are good. So take a look at that situation that you think is so negative and so destructive and reframe it and say, what's God up to? What would He like to do in my life? What that does is it allows us to get the perspective on the situation and not feel we have to do something now. It gives us a perspective because we can take a step back and get ready for our comeback. We can look for the lesson or the opportunity to grow. Reframe the problem. Look at the big picture. If you ask yourself, how important is this going to be a year from now, 6 months from now? Will it matter? The answer is no. It's probably not that big a deal. If you look at an issue and ask the question, is this really worth getting upset about? If the answer is no, focus your time and energy elsewhere. Look at things from a big picture. I admit that the difference between Margaret and I tend to look at things from a big picture perspective almost all the time. She tends to look at things from a detailed perspective all the time. She has more worry and fear in her life than I do. And that's not saying she's bad and I'm good. But she would tell you that I need to pay more attention to the details. And I would tell her, you need to pay more attention to the big picture. But do you understand how different personalities work differently? And what we both need to do is we need to take a look at the big picture. What's God up to? He'll take care of us. I'm not worried about that. I don't have any doubts about that. So I can help her by instilling faith into her, and she can help me by showing us what we actually have to do, because dealing with stress is not only a matter of perspective, it's a matter of action. We have to know the big picture, but we have to know what we need to do today. Look at the big picture. Next one. Adjust your standards to adapt to the stressor. What does that mean? Perfectionism is a major source of stress. Why? Nothing's ever perfect. Nothing's ever perfect. I'll just give you one example of that. I don't have strong perfectionistic tendencies except for one area, sermon preparation. I'll put in, normally, somewhere between 16 and 20 hours of study and preparation to get ready to preach. Okay? Margaret knows that I will sit in the office and I can still, at 10:30 on Sunday night, still be working on a message that I sent the notes to Jennifer for last Thursday. Why? I am deathly afraid that I'll say something that is in error or I'll be unprepared. That's a perfectionistic stressor that I have to learn when is good enough good enough. Because perfectionism is never achieved. Never. God's the only one that's perfect. Everything we do is somewhat less than that. So change your perspective if you're perfectionistic and learn how to set standards that are reasonable and learn how to be okay with good enough. Adjust your standards. Focus on the positive. Gratitude is a stress buster. When things start piling up, focus on what is good. Remember what the book of Philippians says. Whatever things are good, whatever things are honest, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, think on those things. Start to change the way you're thinking. Watch what happens. Is things are going bad, and you say, I know that all things work together for good to those that love God. God, I know that you're greater. Oh Lord, I worship you because I know that you're stronger, greater, and bigger. Now all of a sudden what happens? Listen, the knowledge you have of His Word gets into your heart and comes out of your lips in praise, and you have turned fact into faith. Let that sink in. You're turning fact into faith because you're reflecting on the goodness and the greatness of God and all of His provision for you and all the ways He's cared for you. And you've changed your perspective. Also adapt. Don't try to control the uncontrollable. For example, I cannot ever control another person. The more you try, the more frustrated you'll get. I can't control other people. Rather than stressing over what I can't control, I change the way I respond to what I can't control. For example, if I can't change a person that I work with, I'm going to change how I respond to the person I work with. I'm going to figure out how to work with them. Why? Because the kingdom of God is far more important than the way I feel. The way I feel is not that big a deal. It really isn't. What's really important is that we need to understand God is up to something. And because God is up to something, I'm not going to stress about what I can control. I'm going to respond to what I can. And I'm not going to try and change the things I can't. I'm going to change the things I can. Don't try to control the uncontrollable. Then look for the upside. Look for the upside. I know it's tough because I know that some people, your personality is a little more negative than others. I know that. Any of you never know? Some people are more positive, some people are more negative, some are more big picture, some are more detailed. That's just the way people are different. But look, going through trials makes you stronger. I've talked to people who've gone through all sorts of stuff, and they say, I didn't like it when I was going through, but I'm glad I did. Anybody else can testify to that? Yeah, it makes you stronger when you go through it. But here's what happens, is if we don't go into life and the stressors that happen in our life, believing that God is greater and that all things work together for good because He loves us, what happens is we're setting ourselves up for failure. We're setting ourselves up to be torn down, not built up. Look for the upside. Let's go to the next one. Thank you. Share your feelings. Anybody ever heard this in marriage? Here's what happens. Sometimes what we do is we bottle up the stuff we really need to talk about. And here's what happens. Opening up is not a sign of weakness, but it's a sign that this thing called life was never designed to be lived alone. That's why your community groups are so important. That's why close friends are so important. Because if you bottle up all those feelings, what you're going to do is start stuffing the stress down. Also in accepting, learn to forgive. Learn to forgive. Holding resentment, grudges, and unforgiveness will make you stressed and the other person will go on their merry way. Accept in the fact that you live in an imperfect world and people make mistakes. Let go of it and free yourself from the negative by forgiving and moving on. When you've heard it said that the lack of forgiveness hurts you more than the person who did the offense, it's true. It's true. It will increase your stress. All right, let's, I think there's maybe one more. Yeah. I'm going to give you a list of 18 or 17 practical things you can do to reduce stress. Don't try to do all 17. Just have it as an arsenal that you can pull out and use one or two at a time, whenever it is. Number one, look up. Look up. Every time you get into a situation, say, God, what are you up to? God, I know that you're more than able to help me in every situation. I choose to trust you. Number two, look around. There's something you can do. Don't do nothing. All you may be able to do is go, you're angry, all you may be able to do right now is go and take a walk. All you may be able to do is count to 10. If you're still angry, demand a recount. But do something. Because inactivity, inaction is guaranteed to increase stress. Number three, don't sweat the small stuff. Don't sweat the small stuff. Don't make mountains out of molehills. Number four, recognize there is more than your default response. Choose the way you want to respond. Let God guide you in your response. Number five, learn how to relax. Number six, don't fret. Fear is the enemy of faith and action. Number seven, change the way you see things. Okay? Get enough sleep. Watch your diet, and I'm going to give you two things on this. Sugar and caffeine, what they are is, let me give you an illustration. If you've got a fire, let's call the fire stress. You can either put the fire out by putting water on it, or you can flame the fire by putting gasoline on it. Right? Okay. If you have too much sugar and too much caffeine, that's gasoline on the fire. Okay? Be careful with that. Watch your diet. Number 10, work stress off with a physical activity. I'm going to tell you a fun story. My wife knows that I love to golf. And I always have about a dozen old golf balls in my bag. Not the new ones I play with, but just a dozen old ones. If people have stressed me, happens occasionally, what I do is I take a marking pen and I write their name on a golf ball. And I wait until I'm by a hole, like at Azusa Greens, one that heads up into the canyon. And then what I'll do is I'll take that ball, write the name on it, and it's gone. Now, people say, is that taking out your stress? No, it's saying, I'm choosing to get rid of that. I'm choosing to let it go. It's a physical activity, but it helps me work off stress. Okay? One thing I can tell you, if your name ever gets on a golf ball, I'll love you the next week because I've let everything go from the past. Develop a thick skin and a tender heart. Some of you folks just get way too stressed way too easily. The least little thing sets you off. Grow up. Develop a tough skin, but a tender heart. Number 12, set realistic goals. And the reason this is important is it gets you to the point that you're reducing the stress because you recognize you don't have to do and be everything. Number 13, do something caring or helpful for someone else. One of the easiest ways to reduce stress is to love others. Do something kind for them. Number 14, avoid self-medication. Be careful about drugs, alcohol, and all sorts of other medications, both legal and illegal. Your troubles know how to swim. Avoid it. Number 15, try to be positive. Watch your self-talk. I believe that I'm the head and not the tail. I'm above and not beneath. I'm more than a conqueror. I win. I believe that stuff. And consequently, it gives me a perspective on stress. Number 16, learn how to use stress. Learn how to use it. Learn that stress is an opportunity, not simply an obstacle. Learn how to use it in a productive way. And number 17, God is greater than your whatever. He's greater. That's why he invites you. Cast your care. Cast your care upon me, because I care for you. I invite you this morning, if you do nothing else before you leave this place, I invite you, as the band sings the closing song, as we have a closing prayer, I invite you to just give it to Jesus.